Hi, everybody. I thought I would start this talk just with a few comments about how I got into this area of study, ephemera studies. I wrote a book called The Question of Women in Chinese Feminism, which was all about theories. That is, the archive that I was working from was an archive of theories, and I developed a series of generalizations on the basis of the history of theories of women's liberation in China for about 100 years. But as I did that work, I realized that many of the actual physical journals and newspapers that I was consulting also had advertisements attached to them. So I became extremely curious about the advertisements and why they seemed to be for very familiar brands like Palmolive soap or Pond's cold cream, or what I learned were chemical fertilizers and so on and so on. So I exploited this interest through a project called The Modern Girl Around the World, and a second project in Tokyo called The Modern Girl and Colonial Modernity, which looked at commodity cultures under the Japanese Empire in various parts of Asia. And then on to this current book, which is called In the Event of Women. And so what I learned in that previous pathway that I've taken is that in my own work on ephemera and gathering together little pieces of information, my tendency is to connect social theory to the object world through the image of the commodity, and something I call the other scene of use value, which we can talk about if you would like later on. I am trafficking in fantasies here, because these little teeny-weeny images are fantastic representations of general social theory that we find an urgent problem for intellectuals in China during the years of the late 1890s, right through the current day, if you want to pull it down that far. For me, the question of the ephemeral is tied to the philosophic, and therefore it is not category-free. It is not acategorical, that is, it's not just drifting around, nor is it really properly archivable. It is not data or free-floating, but rather it's closer to being a set in Badiou's sense of a grouping because of its lithographic and photographic sort of actual physical production. Because I pose ephemera in relation to the social theories I see them knit up with, I often focus on how philosophers, commentary artists, advertising merchants, entrepreneurs imagined modern society, which I call the problem of vernacular sociology. So these are people who are very much influenced by the ideas of popular versions of real, so-called real sociologists, and they're familiar with the philosophic concerns, but they build into their drawings and their art and their advertising campaign a kind of fantasy about what the world is going to be like or will have been like in the future when people have free access to commodities. In that sense, I have, or using this developing approach, I've looked at companies like Brunner Monde, Nakayama, Jintan Corporation, Anderson Meyer, or Amco Company, which was very, very widespread marketing company, holding company on the China mainland. Also, thanks to my friend Miho, who has helped me with finding small company archives, I will now probably add one more case study, and that will be mentholatum deep heat rub, which it turns out was marketed heavily in Japan and then off to China and India in the way that the Japanese colonial enterprise corporation did in terms of seeking markets for small commodities. Now, what this has led me to is a real appreciation of Benjamin, which I did not have before I started this project, and specifically to the well-known phrase that in the undertaking, it is necessary to carry over the principle of montage into history, that is, to assemble large-scale constructions out of the smallest and most precisely cut components indeed to discover in the analysis of the small individual moment the crystal of the total event, and therefore to break with vulgar historical naturalism, to grasp the construction of history as such in the structure of commentary. So it turns out that that's pretty much what I stumbled into, as many people do, as we reinvent the wheel. The evidence of Chinese advanced advertising markets in the period of 1919-1937 allows me to watch intellectuals and advertising magnates to see society for the first time and to locate the social as it's being theorized. So advertising ephemera encodes and encrypts something new called society and the social because they're philosophic. This is not a referential system. People are not saying, oh my God, this is society. They're saying society must be this in a modern place. So to be modern, we must find our society and describe it and then project what a better society would be in this trajectory. Now, in this presentation, what I'm looking at are two visualizations or graphically represented ways of thinking about society. One is a neo-traditionalist version of how society should be through a British American tobacco campaign for a defunct brand called the New York brand. And the second trajectory I'll be presenting today is an evolutionary theory of society connected to the Cutex brand, which shows commodity use in society as a positive good which forwards literally racial and social evolution and turns Chinese people from the sick man of Asia into the healthy people that we saw in posters from the Cultural Revolution period, very strong with lots and lots of muscles. Now, please keep in mind that generically, these images come from different sources, and as I show the images, I will try to be clear about that. I would like you to see about 10 images which are not, in my view, part of the Ephemera project. These were drawings of the new society in colonial-occupied Shanghai, but you can see from the perspective and the broad boulevards, the Bund, the ships and so on, you can interpret, of course, what transformation is going on in the visualization of the outside world. This is a depiction of a kind of society. This came out of Genjijai, which was a supplementary pictorial in the famous newspaper Shanbao. And this form of, or just generic form, arrives in China around 1876. It's a lithographic form. I've given you a number of these to illustrate that when people talk about courtesans in the world, and I'm drawing on the work of Cathy Yeh here, and the courtesan culture, we're talking about public women in the public. Now, women before this time are only represented inside because they're cloistered, and this is a gender-segregated society. So once you have people, women people in society, this social element begins to emerge. To this point, in the late 19th century, all of the public women are literally public women. So they're courtesans and prostitutes. And they are associated with the most modern commodities available in the late 19th century. You can see that the light buggy, the light street light, the buggy, the perspective, the European houses, the publicly squared off space. When you look at these, please have this in your imagination as what I'm referring to physically when I say society. Now, these are, of course, you know, all cautionary tales for men. If you get involved with public women in the public space, you will lose your reason, go crazy, and have sex publicly in the park, in the European buggy, with your courtesan girlfriend. So you want to be careful to avoid that scenario. But you do understand that this is a new sector. This is public sex in a social space. Now, I want also to make sure that you have in your mind the image of the modern woman. This is an image of the modern woman. Notice that she has bound feet, but she is akuran. She is absolutely up to date. And this is the woman who forms the backdrop for the modernity of the public woman. Again, these women are depicted as working, and they're working in new public establishments where anyone can come. I simply want to impress in your imagination that this is a modern image of a modern courtesan in what's emerging as a theoretically and practically modern space. Here we see these courtesans mixing with modern folks from overseas. And please keep in mind that the perspective here generically is a new perspective, visual perspective. These women are commoditized women, and the courtesans had competitions in which the best courtesan would be chosen queen of the world for that series. So here you see a group of absolutely famous women who are written up in newspapers as very, very modern people. Okay, here we get into sort of the substance, and I'll count on you to read, and I'll talk over the reading. I'm not going to read out loud in the interests of time, but I want to stress the fact that from the late 19th century, and definitely in the first decade of the 20th century, all of the European and Japanese Enlightenment theoretical works are made available in Chinese, either from direct translation from European languages or translation, plagiarization of Japanese translations, which happened during the Meiji period and were available to Chinese students who were sojourning in Tokyo. I have particularly singled out a volume which is a dictionary. Whenever a historian has a dictionary, we know that a transformation of the basic thoughts has occurred. So in this dictionary, which is called the Xing Arya, meaning the new Arya, we get the new formal definitions of what these social science terms are all about. And I have, I believe, yes, bolded the term for society, around which there was a lot of debate because different people had different ways of translating society into Chinese. Later in the Q&A, we can talk about neologisms and the problem of translation of technical terms like society or sociology. These happened all over the world. I just happen to know a little bit about what happened in China. Notice that the bottom paragraph shows you what the transformation of social relationships from older societies into this projected modern society, named as such, as society, is developed. It is developed on the basis of the nuclear procreative couple. All of those of you who know a little bit about Chinese or Chinese influenced social behaviors, you know that it's governed not by the nuclear family in the old tradition, but rather by the relation between fathers and sons. And there's a whole etiquette surrounding family relationships, which is challenged during this period. So keep in mind that the important point is that now society is theorized from the beginning of the nucleated family. And this is what separates humans from other mammals. It is also something that affects the status of the body. So these are not innocent. In order to reinforce this idea that what you see in theories of society is also happening graphically, I give you a newsroom. These are people who are journalists, a new profession during this period, and they are investigating society. So already society is constellating around popular images, and it is a given fact. I will ask you to read very, very quickly through this. These are evidences of how much translation is going on and the heterogeneous foundations. Now, let us look at the neo-traditional social outcome of a trajectory which postulates society, but wants to keep society within manageable bounds. These are advertisements, very clever ones, for a British American tobacco product, but what you're going to see here are 2 of 40 images, only 2 of which have female characters in them. All right, this is one of them. The woman is being instructed. I put this in just so you'll gasp and say, oh my God, what is this? This is the alternative. That's what we're working toward. We go from this to this in 10 years. This is the second image in the BAT campaign, and the analogy being drawn here is between consuming cigarettes and understanding the beauty of your shoes for your small feet. Now I'm going to flip quickly through these and not translate them for you, but I'm take it my word that these are based on analogy. So you should buy these cigarettes because you are already a gentleman and you are extending your skills into the life of selecting branded cigarettes. Each one of these is a homosocial world. These men are scholars. They're toasting each other, traditional values. It constantly refers back to the skills of gentlemen in the old society and how using these skills will help the new society to be brand conscious and therefore develop without changing anything. The point of this campaign is that women will not come out of the family. Basically, gentlemen will always run the social order. It will just be a better social order because it will have commodities involved with it. That campaign failed. The brand went out of business. It was never continued again. It clearly did not sell. Some people have said, well, maybe the tobacco was bad, but all the tobacco was exactly the same. It all tasted exactly the same. I'm arguing that it was the brand that failed and not the tobacco. Here's one that actually not only did very well, but made a whole ton of money. And this is a campaign based on evolutionary logics. Here, we start this 40-plus image campaign from the ancient society in which beauties, Chinese beauties did very good job considering they didn't have any science. Now that science is available, the society can move forward. Women can come out of the family because they can prepare their hands and their beauty products using and these are the modern beauties, using Cutex hand care products. Notice that there's a coupon there and you can get some stuff by sending away, and this is a story about two women who were competing over their hands, and one of them got the branded commodity and the other did not. Now remember that this is a segregated society, so when you have a commodity product with a man and a woman having physical contact, 男女授受不亲, right? It's violating some of the basic core assumptions about social relations, and that's what you see in this beautiful thing. This is even worse because they're actually physically dancing together, which is taboo in just about every way for a good woman. I love these campaigns. I think that what I'm showing you illustrates very clearly the point that I'm trying to make. But to reinforce my point that ephemera is meaningless in this context without philosophy, I will introduce you briefly to the name of Yan Fu. We can go back to this slide if we need to during the Q&A. This is to really reinforce on you that these are not amateurs. These philosophers are real philosophers. They know Darwin, Spencer, they know Kant, Hegel, Marx, and they are developing ways of understanding. These ways of understanding are picked up by artists, theorists, entrepreneurs, advertising, marketeers, and turned into ads. Now, I have 2 minutes to wind this down, and I want to show you pictures to note how heterogeneous this becomes. The association of social life, the public life of good women, not prostitutes, good women, the public life of good women in society and their role in developing the Chinese society in an evolutionary positive way comes through images like this one, which is actually for Brunner Monde, an English company, Brunner Monde chemical fertilizer. Here is an analogous ad from a Japanese collection in which we see a woman attached to a fertilizer ad. My point being that the liberated woman in society can stand for any commodity whatever. She comes to stand for every commodity. Here's one very, very famous one of my favorites for flit, which is a form of DDT. And you can see the comparison between the old society and the new society based on science, but also the pleasures of the new woman and her gorgeous new bobbed hair, et cetera, et cetera. I've spent many pages describing this ad, and it's one of my favorites. And here, for those of you who are Chinese readers, you will see immediately that the text says that the more commodities you consume at Sincere Department Store, the faster social evolution will occur in China. So there is an explicit, not implicit, association between consumption and social development in what people are calling society. To wind up, social advertising of this kind, and that's the majority block of modern advertisements throughout the Chinese media in the period of the first third of the 20th century, is consolidating a system of ideas. It is ephemeral. It wasn't meant to survive. Nobody has collected it, to my knowledge. But it is not, for that reason, atomized. It is coherent with the general philosophy and social theory of the moment. To end, these are simply very beautiful ads which give women in the new society, this is an ad for oil burning domestic utensils, and we've got her, either her friend or her servant in there. I like this ad very much graphically. It's an anniversary of the Republic ad, but if you notice around her, there are people reaching up toward her, and this becomes a graphic element, a grapheme in a lot of these advertisements. I'll end by asking you to revisit the 1884 perspective on what is modern society in the public space, and compare it to this one, which is an illustration of society as mass consumer society. Jintan was an extremely popular Japanese brand, and when you look at the mass of the consumers, you can see it very, very clearly that they constitute a society. These are my conclusions, and you can read faster than I can talk, so I believe I'll call it quits here. Thank you.